Today we're going to be talking about alternating hexagon and triangle twists to fold an entire tessellation. So this is the easiest way to get started folding hexagon twists because hexagons don't go well together all on their own. They need something in between, with the exception of compound hexagons, but that's a much later topic. And so when you have hexagons alternating with triangles, each hexagon has 6 triangle neighbors and each triangle has 3 hexagon neighbors. So hi, my name is Madonna. I run Gathering Folds, and today we're going to dive deep on what are the options with simple twists for this alternation of hexagons and triangles. We will fold one together on a 32-fold triangle grid on a hexagon, or whatever triangle grid you choose to use. And then I'll go into 4 or 5 different options for how to take this alternation up a notch into more complex designs. So first off, when we're alternating, we need to pick a hexagon and pick a triangle. So here I've picked closed hexagon and closed triangle, and then there's a third choice as well. They are on the same side. So when I'm looking at this small group of twists, closed and open hexagon, closed and open triangle, same side or opposite sides, those are 3 binary choices that lead me to 8 possible outcomes. So we've got closed, closed front, closed open front, or I should say closed open same side, open closed same side, open open same side. Now for the opposite sides, closed closed opposite sides. So here the hexagons and the triangles are on opposite sides of the paper. You can always tell which side you're on. You're either on the hexagon side or the triangle side. Closed, open, opposite sides. So here we have the open triangle hole instead of the closed hole that we saw earlier. And so we get a different effect. Then open, closed, opposite sides, where we have open hexagon, closed triangle. So here again, the open hexagon hole. And last but not least, we have open, open, opposite sides, and this is the one that we're going to fold together today. So one option really quick that I haven't mentioned yet that we do have with this simple alternation is the spacing. Each of the 8 tessellations that I've shown so far have used tube pleat spacing, where the neighboring twist forms a tube relative to the starting twist. But you can do these in denser spacings as well. So this would be open, closed, opposite. You get a flagstone tiling of hexagons. You could also do the closed hexagon, open triangle, opposite sides, densest spacing to get a flagstone tiling of triangles. And you can do that with whatever combination of twists that you like, having denser spacing, but that is a more difficult thing to do. And so we're going to show it with tube pleat spacing today. Now there are many alternatives, and I'll get to those at the end. So for now, let's grab our 32-fold triangle grid on a hexagon. And if you're just watching this live, or if you're here with me live, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and know that I do recommend just watching the first time through instead of folding, unless you're already experienced with folding tessellations. So if you don't have a grid with you, that is a-okay. Watch through the first time, then come back with your grid and take advantage of the fact that this is recorded. It will still be here in days, weeks, months, years. And go back and fold from the recording. So first off, we want to do an open hexagon in the center of our grid. So I'm grabbing my handy pens. I'm going to use red for mountains, blue for valleys. But for this setup, what I'm going to emphasize is locating the center by putting our pleats in the same with respect to each corner. So I'm going to put in a mountain, one spacing above my right side corner, and a valley, one spacing above that. Now notice I run it in towards the center, but not all the way through. Then I'm going to rotate my paper, pass that pleat to my non-dominant hand, and I'm specifically rotating counterclockwise so I can add this next pleat on top, so to speak. So I'm stepping down to get to the previous pleat. And once again, I am doing one spacing up from the corner on my right hand side to put the mountain, and my valley one spacing above that. I'm going to make sure that both of these stay closed as I bring up the next pleat in the same exact way. And you might be noticing that this is building up a puffy star shape, six-sided star shape in the center. And that's exactly what we want to happen. And this is a good time to make sure that our first pleat didn't go too far. And we can just emphasize that puffy star. And if you want more guidance about and practice on a smaller grid with folding these open hexagons, check out my Advent of Tess videos. I'll make sure to put a link to that down below as soon as I finish recording. So with all 6 of these pleats in place, I can double check that I'm centered, because I can check and see if each pleat is the same relative to its nearest corner. And these are all mountains coming in one spacing off from the corner, which is kind of the definition of an open hexagon twist. And then I can push from the top to squash my twist. From here, I'm using my bone folder to flatten all of my pleats. This isn't strictly necessary, but it helps things stay in place. Now I'm going to zoom in, and we won't see the corners of the paper anymore, but that's because I'm really just working off of the center and saying, okay, we said open hexagon, open triangle, opposite sides. So that means off of this hexagon, I need to flip to the other side to put in my next triangles, because in this alternating tiling, we have all hexagons neighbored by triangles. So all 6 of these pleats are going to end up with triangles on them. And then all pleats coming from triangles go to hexagons. This isn't the only arrangement of hexagons and triangles, it's just the easiest one to get started with. So using the tube pleat spacing that I said we would use, I'm going to put my valley in. I use blue dashed lines for valleys, one spacing above the folded mountain. And I'm just arbitrarily picking a random pleat to have horizontal and out to the right, because all 6 are equivalent. And then one spacing above that valley, I have my mountain, which shows me the target triangle that I need for my open triangle twist. So we're outlining this single grid spacing triangle. That's the same outline that we're going to get on the back side. So what I do here is I pull up my new pleat, and you might be tempted to take this grid line as your 3rd pleat around the triangle, but you need to open up and notice that that grid line is 2 spacings out, but you need to open up this pleat to find the grid line that is truly bordering this triangle, and notice that that mountain is 3 spacings out here. So we're going to squash this triangle. And since we have 6 triangles to put in on this side, I'm going to slightly ignore the tiling break. So I'm going to cause pleat overlaps without resolving them at first, so we can get all the way around on this side, reduce the number of times that I'm flipping the paper over. Now this is only something that I do on the inner ring around the first hexagon. I just want to emphasize that for clarity. We do have enough paper. I'm going to be doing another ring, and that's how I'm going to be recommending to do each successive ring. But for right now, we've got 1 triangle, 1 hexagon. We need another triangle, and I'm going to make sure to go to the very next pleat. I don't want to skip a pleat. And I'm going to rotate it into the same position. And specifically, I'm going clockwise here, so I have friendly overlaps when I go to open the hexagon on the other side. So putting in my valley and my mountain that give me the tube pleat spacing, I find my target triangle and put in the tube and open the bottom of the previous tube. And I'm really glad that I do open that pleat, because if I tried to put in this pleat, well, for one, it would give me a closed triangle, but also it would cut through this neighboring twist. So this is the benefit of using tube pleat spacing instead of the denser spacing that I showed briefly earlier. So then coming around, I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. I'm going to set up my tube pleat spacing. And for those of you just joining us, I do recommend watching the first time through, unless you're already experienced with origami tessellations, then folding from the recording. So putting in that open triangle, we can squash and then rotate. We're going to do it again exactly the same way, setting up our tube pleat, opening the bottom of the previous tube, running our new pleat through, and we have 2 ways to verify that we have the correct third pleat. It'll form this single triangle outline here in the center of our new twist, and it'll go straight under the corner of the previous twist. Rotating again, we set up the tube, we find the third pleat of the triangle, causing a pleat overlap, and we squash the twist. Rotating once more. Now we don't really have a tube to align to, but I can see that this mountain would have continued out through here. I can also see that the valley is under here. So another useful way to reference the tube is 2 spaces from valley to valley. And then the mountain is above, and we get an overlap on each of the new pleats that we're putting in for this 6th triangle around the central hexagon. Okay, so once we're here, we're going to flip over to the opposite side. And I made sure that most of these pleat overlaps are nice and easy to open. But this one here, this last one, is very hard to open it doesn't just pop open when you pull on it. So this is the reason why we went around in the direction that we did. And usually if I'm folding for myself, I'll reverse this final pleat overlap so it's easier to open on the other side. So looking at that, I'm going to need to pop it open without destroying the triangle underneath. And I want to make sure that I'm leaving this one grid triangle between these two pleats coming in as a marker for where the next hexagon is going to be. So we're trying to set up a puffy star for the next hexagon. And what we need to be aware of is how these shapes are coming together. So my mountain is coming in here, and this mountain is coming in through here. Hard to draw on things while they're up in the air. And so the way that this will outline a hexagon that is not touching any of the valleys is over here. And so we're going to have this puffy star shape that's going to show up as we add more and more pleats. So I'm going to start actually with this long pleat that's causing a pleat overlap, and then I'm going to go back in the other direction and add a pleat on top, on top, on top to finish out the hexagon. And once you've got this, you can go ahead and smush it from the top to get your new open hexagon. So the first hexagon is typically the easiest. Then we're going to go around and I need to choose. So I've got a pleat overlap over here and a pleat overlap over here. Technically I have two pleat overlaps in each location, but we only really care about the pleat overlap that's closest to the two twists that cause it. So this one out here is closest to this hexagon, but it's not closest to this triangle. And so this one's the one we need to worry about. So if I want to do my next hexagon over here, because it seems more open, more spacious than this one, then I'm going to need to open stuff up. And so from my perspective, I can already see exactly where this hexagon needs to be. I can see, okay, this mountain is coming in here. This mountain is coming in here. That means that these are my little triangles. This is the center of my hexagon. But for a cue to help you learn, the center of the hexagon is going to be in the middle of this tube. Next up, we need to erase the tube. So I'm going to need a valley coming out across my tube. And this valley is going to pop that second mountain of the tube down. It's going to go until it meets the valley of that mountain that it popped down. And those two are going to combine and run off in the third equally spaced direction. Now this comes paired with so it's going to be a three-way intersection of valleys. Comes paired with a three-way intersection of mountains just below, because each valley needs its mountain. And so if I put that in, now I have a triangle wrap. And I'm going to leave this kind of loosely in place because I don't have the rest of my pleats in for this hexagon. And so it'll be very difficult to put everything in if I'm trying to hold this tightly closed. Next up, I'm going to pick the longest pleat that comes into this hexagon, and incidentally, one that causes a pleat overlap, to put in next. So once that's secure, I can then add my next two, one of which is going to come straight to the edge, the other of which is going to go more towards the corner, and it's going to cause an accordion over the pleat from the triangle wrap. So with that twist in place, I'm going to squash, and I'm going to move on so we get all 6 of these hexagons before dealing with the triangle wraps. Again, something I'm doing in this loop that I won't necessarily do in future loops around. So continuing, I'm going to do this hexagon exactly the same way I did that one. So opening up, I can spot the hexagon because it's the hexagon that's nestled against the end of this pleat, centered in the tube. And strictly speaking, that's not why it's that hexagon. It's that hexagon because this pleat is coming in here and this pleat is coming in here. So from that, I'm going to need another mountain going this way. It's going to need a valley on the outside that's going to pop down, and I'm going to get my triangle wrap. I've got that 3-way intersection of valleys, and I can give myself some more wiggle room by putting in this long pleat and then firming up these pleats up above. And squash. Continuing around, I'm going to move more at my normal folding speed. And this is because this is a recording. So you can pause as much as you want. You can go back to the previous 2 twists to see exactly how I'm doing each of these things. I just want to demonstrate what normal folding speed looks like for me. Continuing, we have one more that's exactly the same. Notice I popped this mountain down before I add tension by folding this long pleat. And I'm making sure that I get my 3-way intersection of valleys, 3-way intersection of mountains, closing to form that triangle wrap, making the accordion for the following pleat. And squash. Now I'm around to the 6th and final hexagon in this ring around the center. And I'm going to start very much the same way. So now I need to open up this unfriendly pleat overlap, and I'm going to set it up so that the pleat from my first hexagon in this ring around is going through to the edge without interference. Now I can spot my target hexagon that I'm putting all of my mountain folds around, and then pinpoint where I need to pop the outer edge of this tube down to get the triangle wrap. And this time when I go to put that far side pleat in, I'm not going to run it all the way through. I'm just going to run it until it hits the pleat from the neighboring hexagon and wrap that pleat around. So once again, it's hitting, and I'm going to make that 3-way intersection of mountains at the point of intersection and put that three-way intersection of valleys down below. So that's the easy way to do a triangle wrap. We've been doing the hard way, but it's easier for visibility and paper management and not undoing difficult pleat overlaps. So then I've got my next hexagon, same as all the previous hexagons. I'm just getting these in and squashed. So now we have 6 triangle wraps on the back side. I'm going to flip over. Now the natural way to want to do this is to squash these as closed triangles, and we want to avoid that because we're alternating with these open triangles, so we need to always use open triangles. So what I'm going to do is shift the mountain down a spacing so it outlines this open space. And that should be a bit of a hint. We can go from closed to open by shifting the mountain one spacing. What if we shift that mountain one more? We get double open. So if you're here and you want to get to single open, you shift it back. If you're at closed and you want to get to open, you shift it out. So we're going to do that on all 6 of our triangle twists. Shifting the mountain, putting the valley on the far side, squashing that triangle. And if your paper is agreeable like mine, you can mostly do that with a single finger motion. So I'm it's not being very agreeable right now. Sometimes it just really wants to shift over and put the valley on the far side. Like this one right here is going to be really easy to shift. I just need to poke, and there it goes. So we've got one more triangle here, and done. So the next thing that I want to do is the next ring around. Well, first I want to appreciate right now how we're in this position where we don't have any pleat overlaps. All of my pleats are going straight to the edge. All of my sides are exactly the same. And this is what I call a natural tiling break. So all a natural tiling break means is your pleats are all going to the edge without pleat overlaps. And I typically additionally say that you've done some constant amount around the center. So next, for the next ring around until the next tiling break, what I'm going to do is start from the back side, and I'm going to choose to start here. So I got a set of parallel pleats heading off to my right. Each 6 of these sets of parallel pleats is identical, so I'm trying to choose between these 3 pleats where to go next. And so I'm going to set up the next triangle at tube pleat spacing, but instead of folding this triangle right now, I'm going to keep this pleat and this pleat, set it up as a triangle wrap instead. So that was the opposite maneuver from earlier. I'm taking the triangle, pulling it up, and putting it down. And so now I'm making sure that this pleat in particular is in the correct orientation. I don't care that this one is not. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this outer pleat, where I'm going to first set up that I'm coming in through here. So I've got that spacing right. And then I'm going to set it up as a triangle wrap. So you can see all 3 of these triangle setups, whether the squash twist or the triangle wraps, are feeding into an open hexagon. Then I'll flip over so that open hexagon is on my right-hand side, and I'll set up the remaining pleats around the hexagon. So every time we add a hexagon in the Hexagons and Triangles six-fold tiling, we need to add 2 triangles. This is just an immutable law of the tiling. And squashing this one, it's something that's not so present right in the center, but as you get further out, you'll see more and more that, yes, to add a hexagon, you do need to add 2 triangles. Then once we have the hexagon, I'm going to flip over and change both of these triangle wraps into triangle twists, specifically open triangle twists. Now for my next setup, I've got my next set of parallel pleats, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, okay, where is my triangle wrap that will lead in? And one of the things that I know is that this mountain needs to come under the tip of the neighboring triangle. That's how I can place it. Another thing that I know is that the corner of this open triangle needs to come to the corner of the open hexagon hole. So that means that my valley is going to run through here, so the corner can be at that hole. And then I can open this up, and since I'm putting this down as a triangle wrap, you notice that there's a bunch of things that this line intersects. So we'll get around that on the next hexagon. And I'm not squashing this super hard. I'm just getting the triangle wrap in place enough for me to put in the neighboring hexagon. Getting the rest of this hexagon's pleats in place, I can then squash my hexagon, and I'm being very careful with this one because it's right at the corner of my tessellation, of my grid rather. And so I'm doing a lot of guidance from the underside as I squash. Okay, flipping back over, I can choose to do a partial twist on this one here on the corner. And when I set up this next triangle as a full triangle, I get rid of the pleats running through other twists. So one thing to think about if you have pleats running through other twists is maybe I want to go in the opposite direction. So I'll finish this edge out first, then we'll try going in the opposite direction. So next up, I'm going to set up the next hexagon, again using 2 triangle wraps, just like I have been, to get that in place, and then flipping over to the hexagon side to finish setting up the pleats for the hexagon and squash. And again, I do have an eye on the chat, so if y'all have any questions, feel free to ask. So the common question is, what paper am I using? As usual, I am using Skytone from Mohawk. And the grid that I'm using is a 32-fold triangle grid on a hexagon. And so now, instead of continuing around with the direction that was giving me a pleat through other twists, let's try going the other direction. Let's try starting with the short pleats. So starting with the short pleats, I'm going to have triangle wrap here and another triangle wrap here. And so flipping over, I can get my next hexagon in place, and wasn't that easier? So which direction I go around once I have more repeats is really determined by trial and error. I'm trying and seeing, okay, which way is going to work best? If I go this way, do I have pleats that run through existing twists? Sometimes it's unavoidable, but in this tiling, there's really always a way to avoid that. And one thing that I've noticed as kind of a shorthand is you want to be working, like if you have a set of parallel plates, you want to be working from the shortest ones to the longest ones, in general on most tilings. And then opening up here, I've caused a pleat overlap that I need to resolve because I know this pleat from the triangle goes straight into the hexagon. And then I can set up my two triangle wraps then flip and set up the rest of the hexagon. Flipping back over, I'm going to open this triangle twist, squash my partial twist if I so choose, and again, knowing that the corner of the triangle comes to the corner of the hexagon hole is what's going to help me with squashing these partial twists. And one thing that I'm noticing is that these two partial twists are exactly the same on two repeats along the edge, which tells me that this tessellation is perfectly aligned with the grid, which is actually kind of weird because the closed triangle version with the open hexagons on opposite sides is also perfectly aligned, and I wouldn't expect the open triangle version to also be aligned. So it would be worth doing some experiments to see if the double open triangle version is also aligned. That will be for another day. Because I know that the open hexagon, closed or open triangle on the same side have different alignments with respect to the edge. So continuing around, I'm going to be doing exactly the same thing as the previous side, over and over, getting that corner hexagon in place. So that's part of the beauty of tessellations. It's a very small set of maneuvers to remember. And then we flip and we put in those triangles. I'm really running a loop here of put in two triangle wraps that set up an open hexagon. So here's triangle wrap 1, and here's triangle wrap 2. So it would be a whole triangle here, but I'm going to shift it to form the wrap, flip over, finish setting up the hexagon, if you find yourself doing this hundreds I don't know, maybe thousands of times now that I've folded a hexagon twist, you might find yourself setting up the rest of the twists from the backside. And flip over, resolve those two triangle wraps into full triangle twists, or in this case, a partial and a full. And you can really study as you go around, like how many triangles does each hexagon have around it? In the completed loops, you have 6 triangles around each hexagon. And in this outer loop, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on a hexagon interior to the edge, and 1, 2, 3, 4 on a hexagon on the corner of the tiling break. And this isn't just because I'm running out of paper. This would be true if I had more grid as well. So setting up the next wrap, or I should say wraps plural, I can squash the new twist, making sure that everything is actually where it's supposed to be. Tuck that corner. And with every twist, I'm using my bone folder to get things firmly in place. Flipping back, I've got another partial twist, another full twist, and I'm headed now towards more of my normal folding speed. And again, this is recorded, and we've gone over each of these pieces in detail previously in the recording, so you're not missing anything by me folding a little bit faster. And so getting the next bit set up, I'm going to go ahead, and I know this is going to be an accordion, and do that. So I just need to tuck a little bit on here, get everything nice and to the point, and flip and squash my 2 triangle wraps. And now we're around to the final edge. So instead of 2 hexagons here, I'm going to have 3. And all this means is I'm going to have another round of make 2 triangle wraps, flip over, set up the hexagon, flip back, resolve those 2 triangles. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I've got the first hexagon in with its 2 triangles. And I should say this folding sequence of set up 2 triangles so that you can set up the next hexagon so that you can finish those 2 triangles is the same for every single one of those 8 options that I was talking about with closed, closed front, closed, closed back, closed, open front, closed, open back, open, closed front, open, closed back, open, open front, and this open, open back. So we use the same folding routine to fold each of these tessellations regardless of whether they have the same twists. And that's the central teaching in my Tessellations by Tiles course, where we learn a whole bunch of tessellations by practicing 1 or 2. So now I'm on to the final hexagon here in the corner. Now I'm going to have those 2 partial twists both be those two wraps both be partial twists because I am right at the edge. And flipping over, I'm going to squash this. Using the air a bit more for these squashes right at the edge. And flipping back, getting those two partial twists in place because, yeah, I can't just leave them there. It's a little bit compulsory to finish the tessellation as much as I can on the grid that I have. Unless I'm leaving a border, in which case that's different. So, we've got lovely tessellation with open hexagons on one side, open triangles on the other. It's aligned with the edge of the paper, which we can see because these repeats of the same twist are interacting with the edge in the same way. And now let's take a look at those other special ways to use this alternating hexagons and triangles idea in more complex ways. So first up, you can use different twists. So these are double depth closed triangles and double depth some amount of open. So I would say these are single open for double depth hexagons. And so using different twists will get you different results. Now, something that's as densely spaced as this, I would recommend pre-creasing and collapsing instead of folding twist by twist, because you're just too close to everything to get all of those twists in without pre-creasing. Next up, you can play with spacing. So I had talked earlier about how you can have denser or sparser spacing with the same alternation where you have the same spacing between everything. But you can also change your spacing on some tiling breaks, but not others. So corset here has extra space added on these lines, but not added on these lines or these lines. And so it gives this stretched appearance that is very different from the simple alternating closed hexagons and triangles. So those two are the same choices of hexagons and triangles. There's just a space added in one direction in corset. Next, you can have a whole cluster of twists before you add space in all 6 directions. And then just keep that spacing. So you end up with a hexagonal cluster and then a triangular cluster. And so then you've got this alternation between this hexagon and that triangle, but you're still using the same hexagon and triangle twists throughout. So zooming in a bit on that one, I've got actually an advent of tess start that then was expanded out in this very different way. Then you could also choose not to alternate. You could choose a different hexagon for your next loop around. And that's going to lead to this center and 6 around it pattern, where the 6 around it are the same 6 around, and then you have these centers that show up from time to time. And so the symmetries here are important because you need to know where to put the next triangle to feed into the next hexagon. So the central hexagon is going to be in a position of 6-fold rotational symmetry. So it has 6 things equally around it. Likewise, further out. There are 6 things equally around it. And then the outer hexagon is going to have 3 things equally around it. So that shows up in the triangles as well, where 3 of these triangles, every other triangle, touches that hexagon hole, and then 3 others are denser, taking space away from the hole. And you can do this in a massive variety of ways. It's basically a multiplier on the options that you have for the hexagons and triangles 6-fold alternating patterns. So with hexagons and triangles 6-fold alternating, I said we had 8 options. Well, this, you can multiply that by 4 because you have the, well, technically by 3. Depending on how you want to count it, you can say, oh, I'm going to multiply this by 4. A quarter of those options are going to be the alternation because you're going to end up picking the same hexagon you had before. But the other 3 options of closed front, closed back, open front, open back for the hexagon are also available. Again, one of those is going to be the one you had already, but the other 3 are also totally valid. It might not work in the exact spacing that you choose to start with, so you might want to diagram this as a crease pattern first to check and see if it's going to end up as denser than tube pleat spacing, if that's something you don't want to do. But this is another way to create variation inside of the hexagons and triangles 6-fold tiling, and I have a video on it. It's called Expanded Symmetries. And I'll make sure that that's down in the links below. So next up, you can cluster twists into a hexagonal shape and then alternate them with a triangle. So I've got this cluster of a hexagon and 6 rhombi that are alternating with these double depth closed triangles. So this is the central cluster from day 25 of Advent of Tess, the just rhombi star. And I just took that double depth pleat, put a triangle on it, and off to the races. And again, you can change spacing of where you put that triangle as well. So here, it's still a closed triangle, even though you see that open hole. The paper's just been removed by those 3 neighboring twists. You can see I've still got that triangle shape on the back. So that's clustering where you have a single pleat coming out. You're putting a single triangle on it. But what if you have multiple shapes, multiple pleats coming out, and you want to alternate a hexagon shape with a triangle shape? You can do that too. As long as the pleats match up, you can take a hexagonal cluster, in this case sunflower, from Advent of Tess day, I think 23, and pair it with a cluster of 4 triangles, kind of like we were seeing on Advent of Tess day 4, but this one has an open center with closed on the back. And we can alternate between those 2. So just kind of mind blown with the options here, just the sheer number of options available when we start playing with composing these hexagons and triangles of other twists. Then, yeah, there's just so much going on here, and so these 2, whether the triangle is closer to the center or the triangle is supposed to be further out in the central cluster, you can do amazing things with taking that and turning it into a hexagon cluster with a triangle or a triangle cluster outside of it. So there's many, many options of what to do with alternating hexagons and triangles. And I do recommend working through these in a particular order. So if you're new to folding origami tessellations and you want to dive into this topic, I do recommend that you go close, close, same, closed, open, same, open, closed, same, open, open, same. And then the same order with twists on the opposite side. Then start playing with spacing, start playing with expanded symmetries, maybe use some different twists and get some different options like this half adjacent triangles pattern. And last but not least, start working in clusters so you can get like many variations on the same theme. So that's all for the alternating hexagons and triangles, and I will see y'all next week with alternating rhombi. So we've got a bit of a theme going here. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments, drop them in the chat, and I will make sure to answer them. So happy folding, everybody.